Our moderator for this session will be His Excellency Ambassador Professor Dato Abdul Majid bin Ahmad Khan, former Ambassador of Malaysia to China. Let me introduce you to Professor Dr. Digby James Wren. He's the chair of the Belt and Road Capital Partners, and Dr. Digby James Wren holds research degrees in both international relations and public diplomacy, and is a leading sinologist and ASEAN geopolitical expert. He holds the chair of Belt and Road Capital Partners, a geopolitical risk, investment and trade, and public diplomacy advisory firm located in Phnom Penh, with partnered branches in Paris, Beijing, and Melbourne. Dr. Wren is also the publisher of Long Mekong Media, a leading resource for political and economic information across Asia, and founder of the Young ASEAN Minds education program. Among Dr. Wren's many board and advisory roles are the chair of the US 600 million Mekong Electrification Initiative, advisory board member of the Belt and Road Caucus for Asia Pacific. It's entitled Hard versus Soft Power, ASEAN's Balancing Act in the Shadow of Giants.
I think there is a PPT somewhere here. I'm not sure. It's I'll tell you the truth, and first I just want to say thank you to the organizers, Datuk Liam and others. Thank you very, very much. I don't want to spend all my time on the formalities. You know that I appreciate being invited here again. It's a great honor. And this is an event I have seen. I was here at the first event, and this second event is so much bigger improvement on the first one, and that says a lot, because I think the third one is going to be even bigger. So hopefully I'll be invited then as well. That's my wish. So let's get into it. I'm changing my presentation just slightly because of the conversations that I've had here in the last 24 hours, and also because it seems to me that there's some things that have not been discussed that I should discuss. So the PPT that's here, I may not follow that strictly. Anyway, I had AI help me do that at the airport. That's not to show that I'm very clever. That's just to show that AI is very clever these days. But so I wrote an article for CSD Asia about 3 weeks ago, and I'm basing this talk on that article. You can read that in the newsletter from last month, and also on two other articles that I wrote that were published. One specifically about what the United States is really trying to achieve. And what has not been discussed here, everybody says the Trump tariffs, they talk about Trump. But the first thing that that comes to mind that everybody here should know is that there is an intellectual framework for what Trump is trying to do. And I suggest that everybody note down the name American Compass, which is a think tank. It's associated with another group of think tanks in the United States, the Manhattan Institute, the Heritage Institute, the Hudson Institute. Some of these are neocon institutes, some of them are relatively new, but they're powered by basically the American Compass. Star members are J.D. Vance, the Vice President, and Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State. And they inform and have developed a theoretical academic framework for what you might call as Trump thought. So because in the first term, of course, he was not able to actually develop that. So in this second term and during the Biden administration, he was able to develop that, and had a very strong group of intellectuals with very strong academic credentials who have done that for him. So I wouldn't want anybody to go away from this thinking that these Trumps are. Everybody says that Trump is unpredictable, but it's actually not true. He's extremely predictable, and you can count on the fact that he is going to try to be unpredictable. And in doing so, of course, it should tell everybody in the room that he is predictable, and what he is doing is completely predictable, and there is an agenda and there is an outcome that they want from what they're doing, what the Americans are doing. And that is, of course, intensifying trade and tariffs across the world. But this is also, and as the Shangri-La dialogue proved to us, they're also yelling about threats from every direction, which is, I think many people, ASEAN leaders, realized straight away was really just a call to buy more weapons. And I've had some conversations with some ASEAN leaders about that, and that's the way they said to me that they saw that. So, ASEAN has a lot to lose here. I think some of the speakers talked about that earlier. 60% of the trade is tied to China, the US, and the Asia Pacific. So I think, do I have to press a button or something to change the slides? So this is what I just quickly go through this. I suppose 8 minutes is, I'm going to try and make it as fast as I can. So global trade rivalry, which is what I'm trying to discuss right now. ASEAN's response, major power recalibration, diplomatic balancing, and then what is the future. So let's just get into the global trade rivalry in itself. As I said, the Americans have an actual academic, intellectual framework for what they're doing. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to restructure American society, fundamentally restructure it. And a good example of that would be to tell you that we're talking about hard power and soft power. Now, American hard power and soft power is intellectually driven by Harvard University. Kissinger came from Harvard University, and Joseph Nye, who just died recently. You might have noticed that both of them just died recently. Well, they were the doyens, if you like, of what is hard power and what is soft power. And they're both dead. And Harvard is still, I suppose, the strongest example of what you might call liberal progressive academia in America, and that's where almost all foreign policy was coming out of, the Kennedy School, for example. And so why Harvard has been targeted by Donald Trump and the executive branch of the American government is very easy to see. They want to break that. So you kill the chicken to scare the monkeys. So all the other liberal schools in America will also then line up to adopt this new policy. Now, the new policy, really what it does is, because in the past, and you'll notice that Trump and Rubio and Vance, they're always talking about how past administrations caused all of these problems that the Americans have. And what those problems are, of course, are the fact that they run what is called the Triffin dilemma, which is that they need to have a deficit all the time to maintain their importance in importing goods from other nations, which is what you're all worried about, the tariffs. So that dilemma is what they're trying to escape. And the only way to do that, of course, is to devalue the dollar. And they're allowing that to happen. You can see that that is happening in real time. It's devalued 12.4% in the last 3 months. And that's going to continue. I'll make a prediction that it'll go down another 20% right here, right now, and you can all buy me a drink if it really happens. If it doesn't happen, I suppose I'll just look silly for an hour. So let's just see what we can do about that. So what is ASEAN's response to this? And so far, I have to say I'm not really impressed with ASEAN's response. I think that, and I can give you the example of what happened in Cambodia, and that is that I had said to, and I was an advisor to the cabinet and the prime minister, and I said to them that you need to put a work group together, and you need to be thinking about what's going to happen. They're definitely going to put tariffs on you. They're going to make your life very difficult. Why don't you do it now? And they were like, oh no, we'll wait and see. We don't know. We'll wait and see. Thank you very much, doctor. That's very nice. Well, the minute that it did happen, of course, they scrambled and then they put ad hoc groups together and they said the government was being very responsive. And of course, that's the problem, that all these words start with RE. It's response, it's retaliation, it's recalibration. And it's, of course, it needs to be the other way around. You need to be proactive. You need to have all figured this out beforehand. And it wasn't as if the signs weren't there. So, and now we can see that everybody's doing bilaterals. So this is the idea. The Americans are in the driving seat because it's all bilateral. They don't like blocks. Trump does not think about multilateralism. They're not interested in multilateralism. They're interested in bilateral arrangements. They're also interested in extra-regional defense and security arrangements. ANZUS and the Quad are extra-regional. They're not ASEAN-based. That needs to be carefully thought about. And ASEAN can't be part of that, really. So that's a sort of a small trap that I think ASEAN's falling into. So all of these tariffs, as they were set, was kind of fairly random. Everybody said they're all very random, but they're not really, are they? They're not really random at all. What they're trying to do, and I think everybody agrees on this, is that they're squeezing China first. And they're making it look like they're going to be India's best friend. And what I've said to a number of you in this room is that I do not believe that the most consequential relationship in the world today is China and the US. I believe the most consequential relationship in the world is India and China. I think those are the two most consequential nations. And they have historic roots in Southeast Asia. And to prove my point, why are Thailand and Cambodia fighting over Hindu temples? And that just to prove the point here, that these connections are millennia. We're talking about thousands of years. And I do believe it was the Philippine foreign minister, the former foreign minister, who said, you can't just cut 2,000 years of cultural kinship between India and Southeast Asia, or between China and Southeast Asia. It's not possible. Now, and I've also said to a number of my colleagues here today that India's biggest problem is it doesn't have access to Central Asia. And this is the fundamental core of India's problem in the north, is that it can't access Central Asia directly, which historically it always had access to. And until that problem is solved, whether it's Kashmir or Pakistan or whatever, that's going to always be an open wound for India. And expecting China to help India make that possible, well, that's possible in the future. But I don't know that it's going to happen now. But the Americans are going to make all benefit of that if they can, as much as they can. And so by setting all these bilateral arrangements on their tariffs, they're going to do to ASEAN what they've tried to do in Europe. Now, they've subordinated the European governments. It started with Brexit, and then Europe became less powerful, and the Americans gained far more influence and led them straight into a war in the Ukraine. Now, they've lost. They were out of Afghanistan. That was not good. And now they've lost in the Ukraine. And when I say lost, a year ago on Bloomberg, where I'm a regular guest on Bloomberg, I said that the Russians are winning the war. And I can tell you I got a phone call from very high up in Bloomberg telling me never to say that again. So this is proving to be true, as we see, and we know that the Americans have now pretty well stopped providing guns and funds to the Ukraine, and that doesn't tell you everything right there. And I can also tell you that Ursula von der Leyen, in her speech to the NATO the other day, said that they were going to spend 800 billion euros to rearm Europe. But what she didn't tell you was, in agreeing to the 5% NATO demand, that most of that money is going to go into tech startups. Now, this is also true in America. All this money is going to go into tech startups because they're not thinking about old-style mechanized warfare and all that sort of thing. They're thinking about high-tech warfare. And then that makes you think about how you're going to power AI centers and data centers and build semiconductors and so forth and so on. So that whole relationship has changed, and the Americans know it's changed. So what they're trying to do right now is get some division inside ASEAN as they re-establish and center as much as they can all of the supply chains, global supply chains, center them back into the US. This is what they're fundamentally trying to do. So that's a geopolitical point of view there. So what is ASEAN to do about this? You can't really just kind of direct all of your sources into America again. It's not possible, is it? You're being punished right now. You're going to lose parts of your GDP. So you're going to have to diversify. So everybody's talking about that, going to be green and sustainable and renewable and so forth and so on. Well, okay, very good. But ultimately, you need to be able to sustain the export market you have into the US, which is a declining export market. It's going to get smaller, not bigger. And if it does get bigger in dollar terms, it doesn't matter because the dollar's shrinking in value. You need to think about that too. Actually, it'll be less profitable. So that's another point. And you should look at the fact that gold prices have gone up 29% in the same time that the dollar's dropped 12%. So that tells you that there's other money going around buying, getting out of dollars into gold because it's a better asset, right? Not US treasuries. So the treasury market, the last auction for the treasury market failed. They weren't able to sell all their treasuries. So this is another problem that the Americans are going to face, and they know they have this problem. So when you think about what Donald Trump's doing and with his tariffs and his bluster and all that sort of thing, just remember that he always steps back, actually. He's never been able to land the deal the way he said he was going to land it in the first instance. He's not achieved this once. So he will always step back. So I predict that most of these tariffs are going to drop. He said he's going to provide some letters and that he's going to have, between 20 and 75%. Sure, okay. But as I just said to you, the dollar's dropping in value, so think about how that really works. So the answer here is that you want to be able to maintain and sustain the actual market share that you have in the United States and possibly get some benefits out of the Europeans. But remember that you're in a stronger position with the Europeans than I think most of you think. They need you more than you need them. They also all recessionary economies. German economy is shrinking, French economy is shrinking, UK economy is shrinking. They need you more than you need them. ASEAN growth this year is on average, correct me if I'm wrong, it's 5.5%. So, we're in the growth sector here. And the Europeans and the Americans are in retraction. Just don't forget that. So you need to think about diversing, and clearly it's about the global south. Now, India and China need to come to some kind of arrangement to be able to share the growth that's going to happen out of that. And that market globally is much larger than what Europe and America can provide you in the future. So you all know this, I think. I think you all really already all know this, and you've accepted this reality. So you need to be able to act on that. So diplomatic balancing is the key here, specifically between India and China, and need to come to some more accommodation. Stop competing for leadership of the global south and start acting together. And as I tell all my friends, it's like two logs on a fire. Those two logs have been together for 5,000 years. It's always been very successful. They've been the two largest economies for most of human history. Why would it be any different now? I think the aberration is 500 years of colonialism that stripped your economies of all your wealth and provided the European Enlightenment. So that's pretty well for me. I'm going to wrap it up. So the future for ASEAN is that is fragmentation. I think governments here, you need to think very, very carefully about fragmentation. Now, Myanmar and the Philippines are two problems. And Thailand, Cambodia, and Malaysia. And Malaysia has been a key partner in this, in calming the 5-point consensus. For Myanmar, I've done a tour, as I did a security report on Myanmar. And it's very, very different to what you might ever read in the media. If you want to go a little bit deeper, I can't give you that report, it's confidential, but I can tell you that it's based in problems that are mostly external. So you can demonize the government as much as you want, but what the central government in Myanmar is actually trying to do is keep all their trade routes open. And everybody else is trying to close them. So that's the fundamental problem for the central government in Myanmar. Now, the Philippines, on the other hand, I just don't know what to tell you about that without saying something disparaging. So let's just say that I think the Philippines is going well beyond what is provided for international law. They're trying to extend their territory and therefore their EEZ, which would therefore have a negative effect on the South China Sea. And China per se in the South China Sea is trying to keep the status quo. Whether you agree with it or not is not the point, but the Philippines is actually trying to change it. It's not the other way around. So those are that facts on the sea, so to speak. And there is direct, and you all know this, the American involvement in that, and even not direct. Let's just say it's direct. But you now also risk possibilities with, Cambodia and Laos and Thailand. Now, all of these things are distractions, and I think ASEAN needs to be very, very careful about this in their diplomatic behavior. And the best course of action, and I'm very pleased to hear that most people here have said this, is unity in ASEAN. ASEAN centrality must concentrate on that no matter what. The ASEAN +3 or ASEAN +1, ASEAN +3, and RCEP. And now, because I'm an Australian, I will tell you that especially in terms of RCEP, strengthening that is really, really important, because the Australian Prime Minister made an announcement yesterday that he is going to exercise some kind of strategic autonomy within the US alliance. Now, what that really means, of course, is he's not going to agree to use nuclear submarines in a fight over Taiwan or the South China Sea. Now, the Americans are not going to like that. So that means that Australia is going to be more focused on Asia. They know that's their future. So I think RCEP, and I think you can see that the Japanese and the Koreans have also, the thing about these tariffs is it's a repeat for Japan. It's a repeat of the Plaza Accords, which crippled their economy for 30 years. Do you think they're going to sign up to that again? And the answer is no, they're not. They're going to do everything they can to not do that. So I think, you have a sort of a historic possibility here. And the fact that China said no and stood its ground, which it did, means that I think all of ASEAN, you need to also show some backbone and also say no as much as you can. I suppose just on the last thing, I would say that if you are going to drop, like Vietnam did, your tariffs to zero on American imports of commodities, always remember that the Americans don't make their money on commodities, they make their money on services. And so every time that you agree to do a new long-term contract for a military contract or a new long-term contract with any Western or American-owned Microsoft or whatever it may be, you're locked in here. You're going to be locked into not developing and innovating your own software and your payment systems and so forth and so on. So that you need to have a long-term view of that as well. And I think India could do a lot more there. The Chinese have developed their own ecosystem, and there's no reason why the Indians can't do the same and why ASEAN can't also do the same. I know that there are efforts to do this, but it needs to be coordinated a lot better. And fundamental in all of those systems is non-use of the dollar. So that also has implications that you all need to think about. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Ren, for your very enlightening points. I think you made three very interesting points. One is that Trump is not clueless. In fact, there is a very intellectual framework to what he's doing to further American strategic position around the world. Secondly, it's the question of the most important relationship among countries. We have always thought that it will be between US and China, but he came out with the theory that it could be actually between China and India, given the very ancient civilization of these two countries, and also the fact that actually for thousands of years, China and India actually have led the global commerce for a long time, except during the colonial powers and recently. And thirdly, of course, on the future of ASEAN, he has given us some pointers, but basically ASEAN should actually unite itself in terms of strategy against the changing geopolitical landscape.